rather stand 3 times in the front line and bear one child, weeps Medea. Having been left by her husband, Jason, for another younger bride of noble blood, and exiled from a city she once called home. In less than a day, she manufactures a revenge plot to destroy everything Jason holds dear, even if that means committing infanticide on her and Jason's children. Joining me today to discuss Euripides' 5th century BC tragedy Medea is Dr. Martine Cuypers, lecturer in Greek at Trinity College, Dublin. Dr. Cuypers, thank you so much for coming back, actually. This is your 2nd episode, so thank you.
Yes, it's a great pleasure to discuss the Medea with you, Oscar.
Yeah. Okay, so Euripides is writing Greek tragedy in the 5th century BC. Are there any rules to writing tragedy or indeed plays in the 5th century BC that Euripides has to comply with?
I would say there are conventions, and conventions are more or less about length, about having 3 tragedies and a satyr play in a suite of plays, but how the individual plays are being organized actually can differ quite a bit from play to play. We tend to think that the way Aristotle says that plays should be in the Poetics is the rule, but Aristotle is really, so he's defining his idea of what the ideal tragedy is. And based on what Aristotle says in the Poetics, people in the early modern periods have made up a number of rules, so unity of time, unity of place, unity of action, which they used for their own classical plays. But if you look at the reality, then it is a fact that not all Greek tragedies actually follow those rules. That said, Euripides' Medea is quite a standard play, so most of all it has a very clear unity of action. It is what Aristotle would call a clear plot with a beginning, a middle and an end, in which every action follows logically or necessarily on the previous action. It's also set in one specific place, so at the house of Jason and Medea, and it covers a period that's within one day, and that's actually very important within the plot of the play, because Medea needs that one day to carry out her plan.
Okay, and now most of the audience would be male, I'm assuming, watching tragedy at the Greek theatre. Is that true?
That's actually much disputed, and the honest question is that we do not know.
We don't.
So we don't quite know who was in the audience. Even so, I think we can be quite confident that even if there were women in the audience, they would not have been a majority, they would have been a fairly small number, and that therefore the general rule that the audience is predominantly male is definitely true, and of course that has implications for how the play is going to be viewed.
So was writing a play with a female lead character a bold statement for Euripides to make in the 5th century?
Ironically, it is not. So despite the fact that all the playwrights are male and most of the audience are male, and let's say all public life is restricted to men, tragedies are remarkably often about women. There's only one surviving tragedy in the whole corpus that does not have any women in it. That's Sophocles' Philoctetes. And half of the plays that we have either a female lead or they have a female chorus. So there's something remarkable going on there. So despite the fact that women are very much second-rank citizens, they are not even citizens in Athens. In tragedy, they're very prominent, and it's a very good question why that is the case.
Now, in Shakespeare's period of writing, women weren't allowed on stage. So all the female leads would have been played by men. Was it the same in Greece?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. So all the actors would have been male, and all the female roles would have been played by men, which is possible because we were acting with masks and with robes. So it is not too difficult if you're playing a masks to actually change gender on stage. Yeah.
And when it was first performed or first released, if you like, was the play well received, or do we know anything about how the populace liked it?
The populace we don't know. What we do know is the jury. So Greek plays were performed in a competition with 3 playwrighs, each performing or like staging 3 tragedies followed by a satyr play. So that's a very long suite of plays. And then at the end, there was a jury which voted and awarded 1st, 2nd and 3rd prize to each of the playwrights. And the suite of plays that the Medea was part of received 3rd prize. So in other words, it lost. It lost badly. And it's very tempting to see that as a reaction to the Medea and think, well, they may have been really shocked by Medea killing her children or Medea as a character on stage. But the reality is that we do not know, because it's not only this play, but it's also 3 other plays. And we do not know it. There might have been a thunderstorm at the moment that Euripides was on stage, or it was too hot, or he just drew the wrong jury. It's very hard to say. Apart from the quality of the plays and external circumstances that playwrights couldn't control, there are also the actors, of course, which they might have had an off day. The chorus might have a bad performance, so their singing and their dancing was not quite up to scratch. Or, who knows, the sponsor had not invested enough money into the costumes. All of these factors are simply unknown. So if Euripides receives a 3rd prize, we can't necessarily see that as a criticism of the Medea. But it is remarkable that Euripides was always invited. So he very often was invited to stage his tragedies and his satyr play, but he very rarely won. And there must be something in that. So it's very tempting to think that people thought that he was exciting and wild and controversial, but they thought maybe he went a little bit too far in certain things to give him the 1st prize.
Okay. Now, to move into sort of the story or the action of the play itself, what is the backstory to the action of the play and Medea's character, of course?
The backstory of Euripides' Medea is the quest of the Argonauts for the Golden Fleece. So Jason, who at the command of King Pelias of Iolcos, who is trying to get rid of him because he's a competitor for the throne, gives him an impossible task. He needs to go to Iolcos in modern Georgia, so all the way through the Black Sea and the clashing rocks, to get the golden fleece, the fleece of the ram that once carried Phrixus out of Hellas, out of Greece. As I said, it's supposed to be an impossible task, but Jason nonetheless gathers all the best heroes of Greece of his generation, and he sets out. He makes it all the way to Iolcus, and in Iolcus he only manages to get the fleece by performing an impossible task set by King Aegeus of Colchis. And that impossible task he is only able to perform. What he needs to do is first he needs to sow dragon's teeth, and he needs to kill the earthborn men that are going to be springing from the dragon's teeth. He's only able to perform that because Medea gives him a magical drug. Medea is the daughter of King Aegeus of Colchis, and Medea has fallen in love with Jason. And she, in essence, betrays her father by doing this, because Aegeus doesn't want to give away the fleece, and Jason needs to promise that he will take Medea back as his wife to Greece. That is the promise that is crucial for Euripides' Medea as a play and as a plot. When Jason and Medea, after many trials and tribulations, arrive back in Greece, they go to Iolcos, to King Pelias. King Pelias obviously is not happy to see them back, and either a plot is conceived, or it's a bit unclear how the story goes, because we don't have any sort of like narratives that tell the story in a very full form. But in any case, Jason and Medea get rid of King Pelias with a trick. So Medea convinces the daughters of Pelias that she's able to make beings young again. She tests that, or she demonstrates that, by cutting up a ram like an old sheep and putting it in a kettle and then cooking it, and a lamb comes out. And then Pelias' daughters try the same thing with their father, and it ends horribly, as you can imagine. At that point, Jason and Medea need to flee, and they flee to Corinth. And in Corinth, they have apparently lived for a while at the point that Euripides' play Medea starts. So at the point where we see Medea and Jason appear here, Jason and Medea have actually, Medea has given birth to 2 children, but Jason has decided to take a new wife. And the logic behind that is something we need to talk about a little bit further, I think. But Medea is devastated, and she is not taking this. She's been put on the second plan. She's been rejected for a new floozy, if you want to put it that way, and she doesn't take it very well.
Okay, now the play opens with none of the main characters really being on stage. I think it opens with a brief speech from the nurse of Medea and Jason's children, opening with something along the lines of "if only they had never gone." The tutor of Medea's children, and they have an exchange. Why is it that at the beginning of the play, Euripides does not feature any major characters and instead opens with an encounter between these two people?
This actually happens surprisingly often in Euripides. In this case, it's quite remarkable that with the tutor and with the nurse, we have two characters who are of lower status, so they are not of royal blood, they are humble servants, and they're also male and female, and that's very important. Mm-hmm. So with the nurse, we're getting a female perspective on the plight of Medea. With the tutor of Medea's children, we're getting a male perspective, again from a lower class servant, who is sort of like giving you the perspective of the ordinary man in Corinth there, and how such a person for whom the stakes are very different than for the royal family or for Jason and Medea, how things look for him. That's quite cleverly done, you might say. So you're getting an external perspective. So you're looking at the situation, say neutrally, because neither character is particularly neutral, but we're sort of like allowed to look at it from the outside before we get to see Jason and Medea themselves.
Okay. Now, Jason and Medea's children also make a brief appearance in this encounter. They come in with the tutor. But interestingly enough, Euripides doesn't choose to give the two children names. Why is this?
This again is quite standard. So if children appear in tragedy, they're hardly ever named. Why that is precisely, we don't quite know. What is also quite remarkable is that women, normally, let's say, decent women, are not named. So married women are not named. So the daughter of King Creon of Corinth also does not really have a name in the play. So even if the manuscripts that preserve the play identify her as Glauce, the text doesn't actually have the name Glauce. The text doesn't have the name Medea either. So in the case of women, this most certainly reflects is normal practice in Athenian society. So the rule is, or the ideal is, I should perhaps say, that decent women are not talked about, right? So any talk about women at all is bad, and their anonymity, in a sense, within tragedy has something to do with that.
Okay, so they have this encounter, the tutor and the nurse, and they talk, and the nurse tells the tutor that she's quite concerned about what Medea might do to the children. I think the translation that the Leaving Certificate uses has the quote, "her eyes like a wild bull's." Now, then we hear Medea cry out from inside the palace in pain. She's obviously heartbroken. And soon after this, the chorus enter. What is the role of the chorus in Euripides' Medea, and why does Euripides choose to have them consisting of entirely women?
The chorus is a very interesting aspect of Greek tragedy, which is quite hard to imagine, I think, for a modern audience, because it's so different from our modern staging practice. You have this body in the orchestra before the stage that is there from the moment they've come in until the very end of the play. And what they are precisely is actually, it's quite a complex entity. In a sense, they're a sort of collective character. Their identity really matters. So they're not a general voice. They are, first and foremost, what they represent. In this case, that is women from Corinth, women from the city where Medea and Jason have landed. There are two important aspects. So they're women from Corinth. The fact that they are women is crucial. So as women, they almost naturally sympathize with Medea. But they're also from Corinth, so they also have an allegiance to the royal house of Corinth. And this sort of like divided allegiance, this split allegiance, to a large extent defines how sort of the dilemma that they're facing in the course of the play. Medea, when she first speaks to the chorus, elicits a promise from them that whatever her plan is, whatever she's devising, the chorus will keep silent. And in the beginning, they're finding that quite easy because they can identify with Medea, and they are imagining how terrible it would be to be in Medea's position. But as Medea's plan takes shape and goes to its inevitable conclusion, they're becoming more and more uneasy about what Medea is doing. And the fact that they're also Corinthian women becomes more and more important.
Okay. Now, as soon as sort of that first encounter between Medea and the chorus happens, King Creon, who is king of Corinth, and the father of Glauce, who also becomes important later on. Wait, no, hold on, have I got that wrong?
That's okay. The daughter, the scholar Glauce.
Glauce, okay. Creon enters to speak with Medea, and they have quite an interesting exchange where Medea throws herself to the ground and begs that she be allowed to stay one more day after he's told her that she is to be exiled. How does this scene work to establish Medea as and I have in inverted commas, the master manipulator?
Yes, it is true. Medea throws herself to the ground and she makes herself a suppliant to Creon. And that's all very effective. But there is also a lot of rhetoric involved. And Medea, indeed, is a very good manipulator. And if you go through the play, then she is pitched a number of times against men, and Creon is the first of these. And she always wins, in a sense. In that way, she's very similar to the Clytemnestra of Aeschylus' Oresteia, who also has a way with words. Medea knows what arguments are going to work. And in this case, with Creon, it is very clearly the children. So Creon is a father, and it is the fate of Medea's children that he can sympathize with. And Medea as a mother is then sort of like the second step in that. What Medea manages to wrestle from Creon, despite his own better judgment, he might almost say, and he says so much, so I know this is wrong, I should not be doing this, but he grants her one extra day to stay in Corinth before she will be exiled for having told horrible things about the family and sort of like plotted revenge against the royal family and her husbands. And in that day, that is the day that Medea needs to get her plan together and to wreak revenge.
Now, after this encounter with Creon, he leaves and exits off stage, and I don't think it's seen again throughout the action of the play. Is that right?
That's very true. Yeah, that's very true. He is talked about, but we only see him sort of like through the messenger speech, through the words of the messenger, the graphic display of his death.
He meets a very nasty end.
He does.
Which we'll talk about a little later on.
He becomes a very pitiful character who you might say doesn't deserve this horrible end.
But after this enters the main antagonist of the text, and that is her ex-husband, Jason. What is the significance of her first encounter with Jason, and how does Jason managed to defend himself, or at least try to defend his actions against Medea and his betrayal of Medea?
Yeah, you could say that this debate, this scene is sort of the centerpiece of the entire tragedy. It is the agon, the formal debate. Every tragedy, or almost every tragedy, has such a formal debate. And in it, the characters of Jason and Medea are, let's say, most firmly established. They're pitted against each other, and they're sort of like making their case. Jason is very hard to sympathize with, or at least audiences, modern audiences, have found Jason very hard to sympathize with in this debate. But it's important to keep in mind that early modern audiences found this a lot easier. So it really is a question of perspective to a large extent. Jason's style, on the other hand, is, for us at least, is quite unpleasant. It's very rhetorical, so he's going to rationally explain why he did what he did, and he does that in 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to tell you that A, it was a good thing, and B, it was good for the children, etc. This entire style looks a bit like a lawyer, doesn't it? And that doesn't necessarily, for a modern audience, make him very, very sympathetic. His argument essentially is that Medea only helped him back there in Colchis to gain the Golden Fleece, because Medea was forced to do so by the goddess Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and that therefore Medea doesn't really deserve any credit for that. Well, she deserves to be thanked, but she should not overdo it, right? So Medea is just making far too much about it. What Medea is really worried about, or what Medea's real issue is, according to Jason, is jealousy. It is the marriage bed, and that's what he constantly keeps referring to. So, you women, it is always about your marriage bed. If there's another woman then involved, you cannot think rationally. You're irrational. You're thinking jealously, and you're not thinking about all the good things that can come out of this. In his view, he has done the most clever thing ever. And if you think about it from an ancient perspective, from a 5th century Athenian perspective, what he has done actually does make some sense. What is his position? He's an exile. He is a royal exile, so he was highborn, he should have been king, and he's now living with a foreign woman as an exile in Corinth, and his social status is very low. He has children, but they're children by Medea, and he can't actually give those children a very wonderful future because they're still going to be exiles in Corinth. From his point of view, therefore, marrying the daughter of the king and sort of increasing his status pretty much to the level where he was before, because we don't hear anything about sons that the king might have had, so it seems to be implied that Jason is going to be the successor to King Creon. So that makes total sense. Unfortunately, there is going to be some collateral damage, of course, because the children of Jason and Medea are very much going to be second rank. And Medea is going to be, well, what happens with Medea is a little bit the question, right? So Medea, there's no real place for Medea besides the princess of Corinth. But from the perspective of a 5th century Athenian male who has to think about the continuation of his oikos, of his family, and about his social status, it does make some sense. So Jason does have a case. And you could say that that's also very important if you think about the audience. So we're performing this tragedy in a theatre that's full of men. And these men must have had some sympathy for Jason as well as for Medea. And we can think a little bit about sympathy for Medea further on, but if Jason's case were completely ridiculous from an ancient perspective, you have no tragedy, right? So both positions need to be, at least to a certain extent, be defensible and understandable.
Okay, now the question that this exchange raises is, what insights does this play give into the different ways that women and marriage were viewed at the time? But also, I'm just going to add this in, perceptions of the foreigner, because of course Medea is a foreign woman in Greece. How do these perceptions tie in? And what?
Let's start with the last bit, the foreigner.
Yeah.
It's actually quite remarkable that Euripides does not foreground that at all. So in many other takes on the Medea myth, the strangeness, the foreignness of Medea is made much more prominent than it is in Euripides. It does figure to some extent in Euripides, because Jason, for example, says, well, you were living there at the end of the world, and who would have ever heard of you there at the end of the world in Colchis? I've now brought you to Greece, and Greece is the center of the world, of course, because we are Greek, and therefore we are seeing ourselves, our own culture, as dominant, as superior to those barbarians back there in Colchis, and therefore you have gained more by coming here, Greece, than I gained by what you did for me. That's a very strange reasoning, but it does give you a sort of sense of how Greeks think about self and other, Greek and foreign. In terms of gender dynamics, you might say that we are dealing with the same issue. So it has been thought, or it has been said by many people thinking about Medea, but also about other Greek tragedies, that tragedy is really about Athenian men thinking about their society through others. And that may well, to a large extent, explain why women are so prominent in Greek tragedy. Women are good for thinking with. So you use the other as a sort of mirror for looking at yourself. And Greek audiences, Greek theatre audiences, apparently liked to see their others close to home. So not foreigners, not slaves, not people from other social classes, but gender dynamics. Men and women, and the dynamics between men and women. And a lot of plots and the themes and the conflicts in Greek tragedy are about male values and female values, or exploring male values through women who to some extent adopt these values or react to these values. And that's very important, I think, for the corpus as a whole as we have it.
Okay, now, after this first encounter with Medea and Jason, enter a character called Aegeus, and Aegeus is the king of Athens. What is the significance of this encounter, and why does Euripides decide to include it?
Yeah, first of all, Aegeus is the king of Athens, and Athens is always a wonderful place in tragedy. It's the place where you can get asylum, where wonderful kings live who always take the side of parties who are being wronged, etc. So in that sense, there's a bit of self-promotion in an Athenian tragedy if you're portraying King Aegeus. But there's something odd happening, because King Aegeus, however sympathetic he may be, is also a bit naive. Would you agree, Oscar?
Yeah, I think he sort of allows himself to be very easily manipulated, because I think it's the idea that he wants children, isn't it?
That's absolutely true. And
yeah.
Of course, that is very, very significant within the context of this play, which is about, in essence, Medea's children, because that's what we're working towards. So there's an irony in King Creon having a problem with having no sons and only a daughter, and King Aegeus having no children at all. So you might say that the problem that King Aegeus has is very similar to the problem that Creon has, and then eventually there's also the problem that Jason has. But that's a little bit aside. So the functional role of the visit of King Aegeus, who just happens to pass by Corinth on the way to King Pythius to ask for advice about an oracle that he has received about getting children, sort of within the plot of the play, this creates the opportunity for Medea to find asylum. So she has created time, she has convinced Creon to give her an extra day to execute her plan. But if she takes revenge on Jason in the way that she has in mind, and the Corinthians can then sort of get back at her, either kill her or kill the children, or in any case, she does not win, right? So it's very important that she has a place to go to escape to at the end of the play. Otherwise, you might say the entire plot does not work. Aegeus offers that place. So he promises her that he will take her in if she is exiled, not knowing, of course, what she is going to do. But he swears that he will, and then is bound to that. So at this point, after the Aegeus scene, which is very funny in many ways, the scene, because indeed poor Aegeus is being bamboozled by Medea here, and there's a funny exchange about the children, for example, where Medea asks, so you don't have any children, but you do have a wife, don't you? And do you actually sleep with her? So, and once that has been established, we get to the oracle. But so in this scene, we're establishing a haven for Medea, and at the end of it, the plan can be executed, and that's the real plot. You could also say that Aegeus, after Creon and after Jason, is the third man. She gets the better of with her rhetoric.
So would it be appropriate to say that Medea's manipulation centres wholly around children, that all of her manipulation is based around children and their relationships with children?
I think that is a very good observation. I don't think that's actually found in a lot of scholarship, so that's a very good thought. You need to write an article about it.
Okay, thank you. So after this, and she's realised, okay, she can go to Athens once she has exacted her revenge, how does she go about exacting this revenge, and what does it entail?
The revenge, first of all, entails a retraction. So she makes Jason come back and says that she retracts everything that she has just said, all the nasty things that she said to Jason. She says, well, Jason, you were right, and of course you were doing the sensible thing. I completely accept that at this point, after all I've done and said, I cannot escape exile, I need to leave. But if only the children could stay, and then you can make new brothers for them, and it will all be fine and dandy and wonderful. So that is not very convincing, of course, because, well, those children are not going to be having a very wonderful life. But that's what she pretends, and Jason goes for it without any questions. The plan then is that the children will be sent to the princess, the daughter of Creon, with a dress, which Medea has poisoned, but it's a gift to manipulate the princess, and the princess should then convince her father to make the children stay, those wonderful children who gave her the wonderful dress. This, of course, goes horribly wrong. Yeah.
Okay, so she ends up actually, as far as I remember anyway, she gives the dress gets given to Glauce, and
By the children,
yeah,
yes.
it poisons her. It's been cursed by Medea.
Yeah, so she puts on the dress and she parades around in it, and then somehow it's horribly described, like the flesh starts falling off her bones, etc. Her father tries to rescue her, and he too suffers the same fate when he touches the dress. And then Jason is in a horrible situation. Well, not quite as horrible as he will be at the end.
Okay, because that brings me on to the next point of what she does, and she kills her children, which I mentioned in the introduction, but I suppose that she finally gets round, she actually murders them, herself. And I think it's Euripides as Medea is one of the few tellings of the story where Medea herself actually lays hands on the children.
That's correct. Yeah, after Euripides, this becomes a standard element, but before him, normally the people of Corinth killed the children. And this is an innovation. So Euripides has consciously and purposely made Medea kill her children. And you could say that changes everything in many ways. Because it makes Medea a very problematic character. A mother who kills her children. Why does she kill her children? In the end, it has to do with the Greek code of honor, the Greek male heroic code of honor, which to some extent is also the civic code of honor. So Athenians would also have been able to identify with that. And that code is helping friends and harming enemies. In tragedy, that's actually a very, very important central idea. A Greek man is supposed to help his friends. That's something we can easily understand because, well, we have the same value. But he's also obliged to harm his enemies. Once someone is identified as an enemy, you have the obligation as a Greek man to harm that person. Medea is in essence adopting that code, which is a male code, and is taking it to the extreme, more extreme, you might say, than any Greek man would ever take it. And she has decided, she has figured out for herself that the way she can harm and hurt Jason the most is kill his children. So if the princess is killed, the father is killed, the children are killed, then Jason has nothing left. He has no new wife who's going to give him new children. Medea is gone, his children are gone, the protecting king in Corinth is gone, and he's going to be he's completely destitute. This is the way Medea can hurt him the most. That the collateral damage is that she is killing her own children, and that she will also herself suffer because of this, and do something truly atrocious that will make it impossible for anyone in the Greek world to sympathize with her, is just, as I said, collateral damage. She thinks the code to the extreme, you might say.
And you mentioned it slightly earlier on, but just to bring it back a little bit about the chorus and how their view change of Medea from the first point where they're sympathizing with her, they're saying this is horrible, to punish Jason will be just. And then at the end, how does their view change once they see that she has firstly killed Glauce and by extension Creon, and then her own children?
Okay, the chorus at the end, at the beginning, as I said, was quite enthusiastic. And one of the first choral odes is all about, now fame will come to women. If Medea manages to take revenge, then we women will be something too, right? So we will be talked about, we will have kleos, we will have reputation, we have glory. And at the end, when Medea kills the children, it's completely gone the other way, because they too are mothers. And this is something completely inhuman. This is something they cannot sympathize with. It's something they cannot possibly understand. And at that point, Medea has completely lost them. And the sympathy shifts from Medea to Jason in such a way that you might say that it's completely reversed at the end of the play. The audience's sympathy almost inevitably will go with the chorus in the direction of Jason, which is quite difficult and quite odd for this play. So Medea is very sympathetic at the beginning, and Jason is very unpleasant. And at the end, it's almost the opposite.
Okay. Now, after she's had her final encounter with the chorus and killed her children, she escapes from Corinth on a chariot pulled by a dragon, and that chariot belongs to the sun god Helios, if I'm right.
That's correct.
And before she leaves, Jason manages to catch her one last time, and they have this exchange. What's the significance of this? I'm not sure if you call it Deus Ex Machina, but it is.
Yeah, that's a very good label to stick onto this final scene. It is in many ways a Deus Ex Machina scene. So in quite a few Greek tragedies, there is a god appearing at the end to resolve the unresolvable, or to bring closure to the play. And Medea's departure here in the chariot of Helios, her grandfather, is staged in the same way as a Deus Ex Machina scene would have been staged. So the chariot is suspended from the crane, so the mechane, hence Deus Ex Machina, the god from the mechane, the god from the crane, and she flies away in the same way that a god would have been brought in or out of the theatre. This suggests that there's something going on. In many versions of the myth, Medea was much scarier and more divine and inhuman than she is in Euripides. She is a sorceress, she has all kinds of powers. Euripides has toned all of that down a little bit. So yes, she has magic potions and can do things with poison, etc. Yes, she is a foreigner. Yes, she's heroic, so she's the daughter of a king, and the king is a descendant of Helios. But Euripides, in the plot of the play, doesn't make an awful lot of that. But at the end of the play, all of that is made very prominent. So at the end of the play, in the Deus Ex Machina scene, Medea becomes, almost a god. And her revenge, therefore, looks a little bit as the sort of revenge that the goddess Aphrodite has wrought in the Hippolytus, or that the god Dionysus has wrought in the Bacchae. And you get the sense that we are invited to see Medea's revenge almost as a sort of divine revenge on Jason for what he has done. And it doesn't seem fair in the same way that those divine revenges in other plays do not seem to be quite fair. What you make of that is a good question. I don't think there's any single and simple interpretation of this, but we're definitely supposed to see Medea at the end of the play in a slightly different way from how she has emerged throughout the play, from the beginning until the end.
Yeah, and the other thing that just to mention there is that she wants to take absolutely everything away from Jason, to the point that she even brings the bodies of her children with her so Jason cannot bury them.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. So Jason is literally left empty-handed. He's come to the house to get the bodies of his children whom Medea has killed, and he's not even granted that. So he's not allowed to lament, he's not allowed to bury, he's not allowed to mourn, and he's just left all alone, very literally.
So the closure just ends with Medea. I wouldn't say victorious, because she has, of course, had losses herself, but she definitely sort of gets away the better of the two. Now, to sum everything up that we've talked about, what are the 3 key points you'd like people to remember about Euripides' Medea?
That's a very difficult question.
Everyone always dislikes these questions.
Yes. And boiling down the Medea in three points. I think there are the sort of general principles that I would like to emphasize at the end. One of them is this general sort of code of helping friends and harming enemies. If you keep that in mind, then suddenly what Medea is doing makes a lot more sense. This is a hard code, and Medea is adopting it. And once you know what the code is, then that is in many ways a key to the play's action and Medea's decisions. A second point that I find very important, I think, is that you should be careful with how you sort of extrapolate views about women from this play. As I said, both the male perspective and the female perspective needs to be, to some extent at least, comprehensible to the audience of this play. And it's very important to keep in mind, I think, what I said about that women are good for thinking with, so self and others. So we are looking at women, to some extent, to define what it means to be a Greek, an Athenian man, and what precisely the message is that we need to be getting from this play is a good question indeed. And some critics have said, well, clearly what Medea is showing us is like the dangers of women, or of giving women too much power and too much freedom and space. Other people have said, well, no, it's actually querying male norms, because, well, Medea is adopting male norms and, well, they have horrible consequences. Surely there's no single and simple answer there, but I think it is important to keep that in mind. So women as mirror for men is very important for looking at this play, and whatever you decide that might mean. The third point is about looking at plays in context. And we talked a little bit about Jason's position being understandable from the perspective of a 5th century Athenian man. And that's very important. Euripides' Medea has been interpreted and so like evaluated in many, many different ways, from antiquity all the way to, well, very recently, just a couple of years ago on stage, Selina Cartmel in Dublin. All modern interpretations, later interpretations of the play are very valid and very important. And the fact that it is eliciting all of these reactions is very important. But it is really very important to see the dispute and see the action, see the conflict of the play also within its ancient context, and to start with that before you sort of like make value judgments about Medea or about Jason or about any other character in a Greek tragedy.
Okay, brilliant. And that brings us nicely to the end of the podcast. Dr. Cuypers, thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
It's been a pleasure.
If you are going to be sitting a classical studies exam in June and tackling a Medea essay, may I wish you the very best of luck. And also, if you enjoyed today's podcast and want to find out more or get involved with Classical Youth Society of Ireland, you can contact us via our social media pages on www.facebook.com/Classical Youth Society Ireland, Twitter @CYSI_, or for any direct inquiries you can email us cysiofficial@gmail.com. Today's podcast was edited by Michael Fuller. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.